It is what it is. I'm a resident of the Niagara region, and that's why I'm here today to discuss the procedural bylaw change recommendation, section 4 specifically. So this is a motion fundamentally on free speech. You know, there's multiple sections, but the most fundamental core part of it, and the reason why it's so contentious, is because it's a motion on free speech, free expression. Particularly, it is a motion to limit freedom of speech and freedom of expression in the council chambers, which is very strange because regional councillors and leaders are supposed to maximally uphold our fundamental freedoms and values like freedom of expression and freedom of speech, and freedom of discussion, and not implement policies to diminish them. In the procedural bylaw change recommendations, section 4, and as very diligent regional councillors, I'm sure you all read through these recommendations thoroughly. A few examples are cited as precedent of why we should ban constituents from bringing in signs, props, etc. But all of these examples are not relevant. They're not analogous to our situation here in Niagara at all. And I don't need to explain to you, regional councillors, why these are all very, very different examples from very, very different contexts. Federal government, federal parliament, Ontario legislature, City of Toronto, they're not relevant to our situation here. MPs and MPPs at the federal and the provincial level have all sorts of restrictions on their behavior that I don't think anybody would seriously consider implementing here. Again, it's not relevant, it's not necessary. And just because they do something in Ottawa or they do something in Toronto, at Queen's Park or the city of Toronto, there's no need to bring it in Niagara. It almost feels like it almost feels like this proposal rather, is trying to bring big city politics into our community of Niagara, which isn't something that a lot of constituents want to see. Furthermore, another false justification for this proposal, again in section 4 on page 8 of the procedural bylaw change recommendations, is that allowing such distractions such as signage, props, etc. may, quote, hinder deliberations and diminish the focus necessary for making informed decisions on behalf of the community. I personally have a little more faith in you all than that. I don't believe that you're so easily distracted that somebody silently wearing a pin or holding a placard or holding a sign or somebody wearing a traditional piece of clothing such as this will render you unable to function. I don't believe that of you, and I don't think you believe that of yourselves. I think you guys have more mental acuity than that. So the supposed justification that it's simply a distraction, allowing signs or flags, etc., and will cause disruption is meaningless and irrelevant. I mean, look behind me. Virtually everyone behind me, all of the members who have come here today, members of our region who have come here, are wearing what would be considered potentially as props, right? Some of them have signs, some of them are wearing keffiyehs like myself. So, and we haven't had that many disruptions. And in fact, I mean, we heard from the Chief of Staff today that this is in no way intended to limit traditional items of clothing. That's a quote. But frankly, I don't care what it's intended to do. Like, part of the problem is that this proposal is so sweeping and so broad and so poorly defined that someone with perhaps less integrity or perhaps less good intentions can come and say, you know what, this is not a traditional piece of clothing, it's a cloth, or it symbolizes whatever, or that I'm wearing a pin and that symbolizes whatever. It's not about the intention, it's about what this proposal could lead to, and that is restrictions on freedom of speech. Lastly, I want to be clear, while this is a motion on restricting freedom of speech, it does not take place in a vacuum, and I'm glad, very glad actually, that we were reminded by the Chief of Staff of what happened at a former council meeting where locals wanted to speak about a matter that was important to them, and you, regional council, with respect, decided to ignore your own constituents. And the aftermath of that decision has not died down yet. So it's very, very, very cynical then to say that we're implementing this restriction of freedom of speech by banning people from having signs or placards or wearing traditional clothing. And again, it was claimed that this isn't a ban on traditional clothing, but it could very easily be implemented as that because it's not defined at all what constitutes a sign, what constitutes a placard, what constitutes a prop. Because of that, implementing this restriction of freedom of speech allow people to speak freely, unrestrictedly in the council chambers. By restricting freedom of speech, we're also allowing freedom of speech. It doesn't actually make sense. The way to promote freedom of expression is definitely not by restricting forms of freedom of expression. Again, it just doesn't logically make sense. I was raised with the principle that to show leadership, when you make a mistake, you admit the mistake and you make amends. And in this case, regional council unfortunately did make a mistake when they decided to not allow their own residents, their own constituents, to speak on a matter that impacted them. Don't double down on that mistake. Don't double down on it. I know many of you, I've worked on some of your campaigns, I've seen you actively engage in your communities, in your ridings, in your constituencies, and I know that you all aim to be people of integrity, and that's why you repeatedly went to the Integrity Commissioner to get this report put forward. So I know you aim to be people of integrity, so please listen to your constituents, listen to your fellow Niagarans, vote for recommendation 1 or not, as you will, vote for recommendation 2 or not, as you choose, but for option 4, vote against option 4, because it is a sweeping, unrealistic, irrelevant limitation of your own constituents' freedom of expression.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time.
Time is expired. Thank you very much for your delegation.